Hey guys, how's it going? It's Mike with another MLS updater, and today we're looking at one of the sides which failed to progress this weekend, a Nashville side who succumbed to a 1-0 defeat at the LA Galaxy this weekend. The LA Galaxy will now go on to face LAFC in El Trafico, and Nashville will almost immediately begin their preparations for next year, finding ways of supporting MVP Ani Mukhtar. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Ben Wright, who's going to be giving us a lot more of a deep dive into Nashville's season, their time in MLS, and what we should expect for them moving back to the Eastern Conference in 2023. Okay, hi guys. I'm here with Ben Wright. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Michael. Thank you for having me on.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks so much for agreeing to come on and talk all things Nashville. Not the result you would have hoped this weekend, but could you let everyone know before we kick off, like your experiences with the club?
Yeah, for sure. So I started covering Nashville SC in 2018, right before their first professional season started back in USL. So covered them for 2 years there with Speedway Soccer, which is a podcast and website that we started. Moved from that to covering them in MLS for Broadway Sports Media, which is a local outlet covering kind of all things Nashville sports. So I still do that locally, and then kind of within the last year or so have added in some more national coverage with MLSsoccer.com. So yeah, it's been kind of a crazy ride watching Nashville take off from an amateur team to an MLS team with the biggest stadium in the league. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can only imagine with from what you were saying from the start as amateur to the crowds that we're witnessing and the excitement that was waiting for the season to start at home. You had that long stretch of away games to kick off this season. How has it been in this new stadium? What's the feeling around the city for the club and getting into these games?
These players had quite a wait. They're on their way now with every stride imprinting their names into the folklore of this club. A day of history in a city known for harmony. The curtain goes up next.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of excitement just for the stadium and for having a professional team. I mean, obviously they played 2 years at Nissan Stadium, and I think there was a lot of excitement there, but I feel like just something about having their own building kind of took it up a level. I mean, they were consistently one of the better attended teams in MLS this year. The atmosphere was great. I mean, the building, just the way it's designed, it just holds in noise like very few buildings I've been in. So, I mean, even they had a US Open Cup game against Atlanta, and I think there were 13,000 people there, and it still was incredibly loud. So yeah, the atmosphere is great. The performance on the field hasn't been as great at their stadium. I believe I have the numbers. Yeah, they were the 23rd best team at home out of 28 teams in MLS. So a lot of work to do in the offseason and next year to actually perform at the level that they had at Nissan Stadium. But I think there's a lot to be excited about, and the infrastructure for sure is there.
Yeah, it does look like that. The support you get is to fill up and to still not be having those results, like you say. At home, it hasn't really clicked yet, but the fans are still there. The fans are all cheering them on and encouraging them on. So it's positive signs, at least around that. Let's touch on the playoff game this weekend. Obviously, a 1-0 defeat to LA Galaxy, and
plays him along the byline, the cross to the back post. Araujo score! Julian Araujo, 1-0 Galaxy, pending VAR, of course.
It seems really hard to come up with something new to ask you about this Nashville side. It just seems they neutralized Mukhtar, and no one else seemed to really be able to get things going for the team.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the story of the team for the past 2 years. Mukhtar has been like historically good. I mean, I think it was MLS PR put out a tweet. He's had 62 combined goals and assists over the past 2 years, which is the 5th highest in league history in a 2-year stretch. So I mean, he's been absolutely elite. I think he'll take home the MVP for the regular season, and deservedly so. But the problem has been there has been absolutely nothing outside of him. Last year it was a problem, and it's been even a bigger problem this year. At least last year, CJ Sapong and Randall Leal kind of flirted with that 10-goal mark. This year, Leal has, I think, 1 goal, and Sapong has 6 and hasn't scored since May. So it's a pretty significant drop off. Mukhtar had been matchup proof essentially throughout most of the season. And down the stretch, we saw Houston, he wasn't as effective. Against LAFC, he was kept off the score sheet, and then LA Galaxy did a really good job neutralizing him. I was pretty surprised to see, I guess Gary Smith wasn't at the game. He stayed in Nashville sick, but I guess the plan throughout the week had been to really go there and try to play defensively and to limit what the Galaxy could do. And I was pretty surprised to see them take that approach, but it worked well for them. I mean, they held the Galaxy to 7 shots. They had a couple half chances. Mukhtar had a really good shot and just missed it. So I think it was one of those games where Mukhtar has carried them for the whole season. You can't expect him to do that forever. And he didn't against the Galaxy. And like has been the problem all season, no one else stepped up.
Yeah, it seems to have been that way. And it was interesting that LA Galaxy could do that. They were one of those sides that have the defensive issues themselves. So it's
Right.
So for them to actually step up and to really neutralize him was impressive from their standpoint. But what should we really be expecting from players like Randall Leao and things like this? Schaffelberger's come in on loan and provided a little bit of energy going forward. But is it an issue with the system not being able to get them in, or is it just they're just not at the level of Mukhtar? What do we see as the real issue here at the moment?
That's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
I think if anyone could answer that, I think they'd probably be managing in MLS, because it's been a problem for 2 years. No, I don't know. I think there is probably some systemic issue, because we've seen Nashville clearly know that this is a problem, right? They went out and they got Jandre Cadiz on loan with a purchase option. He was a DP. He never really took off. They spent almost $2 million on Rodrigo Pinheiro as a young DP, like U22 initiative signing. He played 16 minutes last year and left kind of in a huffle. They never even announced the loan move. They kind of just swept that under the rug. And he's been absolutely tearing it up in the Chilean first division. And then Ake Loba, they spent $6.8 million on him, and he has not even played a playoff game for Nashville. He's been here for 3 and has been an unused substitute in all of them. So they've clearly realized that they need help. They've tried to address it, and either the players they went out and tried to get weren't good enough, or there is some kind of issue fitting them into the system. And I tend to think it's a little bit of both, because I think all 3 of those players maybe aren't the greatest players, but they're decent. They played well before they got to Nashville, and both Cadiz and Pinheiro have played well after leaving Nashville. So I think there's something going on with how Nashville scout and implement attacking talent, and then how they're able to integrate them into the system.
Cross whipped in for the right side by Shaq Moore. Now Hadi Mukhtar in the box. Jose Martinez defending, and Mukhtar with a tough finish. He rifles it over Paz up into the top netting, and it's a goal for Nashville.
Yeah, it seems like, watching them from afar when they came into MLS, you could see how well that Gary Smith set them up defensively, and they were to counterattack. And it seems like this year it's been a back 5 regularly from the start, from what I remember, from the start of being in MLS. And he's tried to introduce a back 4 and try and get players going forward this year at times, it seems, but they haven't quite worked out how to move on maybe from that sort of ultra defensive unit to counterattack.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I mean, Gary Smith has been on record since USL that his preferred system is a 4-4-2. I mean, I guess it's kind of a 4-4-1-1 with Mukhtar kind of playing a free role. Yeah. But he's preferred that. They started that out in MLS and they quickly switched to it. And honestly, last season, it was probably switching to the back 5 that really brought out the best in Mukhtar. He kind of took off after they switched to that system and pushed him further forward to goal. This year, they've tried to go back to the back 4. It was one of the reasons they spent so much money on I'm blanking on Shaq Moore. I can't believe I missed that for a second. They spent $2 million on him. So he's the third most expensive signing in club history. And they really did that with the intent of being more proactive, playing on the front foot more. And it's just been a struggle. I think they're still at their best on the counterattack. That's when Mukhtar's at his best, when he can just kind of find space behind the defense, get some defenders isolated and take them on 1v1. And they really haven't figured out how to be effective when teams sit deep and kind of ask them to break them down. Dax McCarty is probably the best midfielder they have at that. and he's 35. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him next year. And then outside of him, Brian Anunga and Sean Davis played the most this year, and they're both good ball winners, but they can't really progress the ball super effectively going forward, and they definitely can't do it against a packed defense. And then Anibal Godoy missed half the season injured, so there just weren't a ton of answers. And I mean, you saw it in the LA game. As soon as they went up a goal, the Galaxy defended heavily. I mean, they brought on an extra center back, played with 5 at the back, and Nashville just didn't really have any ideas for how to break them down other than crossing, which has, again, been kind of a recurring theme for them throughout their time in MLS, that when they can't think of an idea, they just cross it, and it's not super effective. So I think they have a lot of work to do this offseason, both in kind of evaluating their system and how they approach games, and in kind of taking a look at this roster.
Yeah, you mentioned Shaq Moore there coming in and wanting to use him as the right back. Was it Mule, I think, at times was used at right back?
Yeah, he was kind of on the right wing back when they were playing in a back 5, and then Eric Miller whenever they used a back 4.
Yeah.
I mean, after Alistair Johnston left, obviously.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Was the period between losing Johnson and replacing him with Shaq Moore, has that delayed how they've been able to prepare for this sort of change back to the back 4, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question. It may be a bit. I think it was also delayed too because they played the first 8 matches of the year on the road, and they almost approached that like a different season or a different section of the season, where they just leaned heavily into the defend first approach. So I think they probably, regardless of who was on the roster, I think they probably would have played in that back 5, and really just kind of tried to survive the road trip, which they did. They did really well on that 8-game road trip, and I think everybody kind of thought, okay, now they're playing at home, a switch is going to get flipped. They've been great at home for the first 2 years, so they're going to continue to be great at home, and it never really happened. I think some of that was kind of trying to figure out the switch to the back 4, and I think maybe too the roster was not built for that system as much as they thought it was going into the year.
Will the obviously reading from your site as well, the MLS Next Pro side coming in next year, and the plans for how to use that side as a way of developing these young players to maybe come into this system? Is there a sense that now Nashville know exactly the system they want to play, the system they want to work towards playing, maybe is a better word, and that this gives you more of a chance in the long run to make sure you have that deeper roster to be able to fulfill these roles?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to some extent, it feels a bit unknown just because the league, the MLS Next Pro, is so new, and I think we're still trying to figure out how they integrate even the flexibility between the first team and the reserve team, like how much you can send players back and forth and all that. So I think there's going to be a learning curve there for Nashville. I mean, they're still early in their youth development. I mean, the academy is just a couple years old, but they've had some academy products train with the first team. I wouldn't be surprised if we see their first homegrown player come through next year. And I think getting them like professional minutes at MLS Next Pro is going to be big. I also think it's going to be important for guys who have been on the fringes of the first team roster and never really could break through. A guy like Handball Apwana, even thinking back to last year with Rodrigo Pinheiro, when he was just sitting on the bench or out of the squad and really had no opportunities to get games. I think having a professional team close by that you can send players down to and get real minutes there, I think that's going to be really important for them. I don't know if the system is set in place, but I think kind of, at least if you're referring to formation, I think it's kind of fluid, but I think their general like philosophy and their fundamentals of how they want to play, that's gonna be the same, definitely, as long as Gary Smith is in Nashville. And I think probably that's how they want this team to just approach games, regardless of who's the manager.
Yeah, I guess it also helps, like you say, with some of these players that have been brought in, the transfer strategy and the recruitment can be quite difficult when you haven't got the opportunity for the players to play reserve minutes and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
The squad. And maybe it takes a little bit of pressure off of the recruitment staff and Gary Smith himself of, we're bringing this player in and they have to perform straight away, at least now.
I mean, it gives them another avenue to break into the first team besides just training. Like, you can have a guy who was on the outs in the first team, send him on loan, and he gets in really good form, and then you have a whole other opportunity to kind of, for the players to get in form and prove that they deserve more minutes, and for the coaching staff. I mean, it's just more data points for them, being able to see these guys that they've brought in, how they perform in a similar system. So I think it has the potential to be super helpful, and I think it probably just will take time to be as effective as they want it to be.
Currently active. We have our first cup set alert. But this is a good run by Hawkinson. Forward, across. It is off the crossbar and in. Loba.
Players who have struggled in the first team, one like you mentioned, Ake Lobo especially, is such a highly paid player as well. I think he's your third highest salary, I think.
The MLSPA just released the updated salary. Only Walker Zimmerman and Hani Mukhtar make more than him, and his transfer fee was over twice as much as they paid for Hani Mukhtar, which is just absolutely insane.
That's it's almost you have to read it twice the next time you see
right
that.
Yep.
How is his place on the roster at the moment affecting what Nashville can do going forward?
Well, I think it affects it in a number of areas. I mean, for starters, he's played 421 minutes this season, which is just mind-blowingly low. He's not even one of the first options off the bench. A super draft pick like Luke Hawkinson, who is he works hard and everything, but he's pretty limited in what he can do going forward. He consistently gets into games ahead of Ake Loba. So he clearly there is absolutely no trust in him from the coaching staff. But it affects the team in a number of ways. I think they expected him to take a step forward this year, and they built their roster that way. I mean, they got rid of Daniel Rios, who was not the most effective player for them, but he could still do a job off the bench and in limited minutes. They got rid of him, and I think he would have really helped this year. Yeah. I think if Ake Loba isn't on the roster, they spend big on another forward. So I think he affected what they did in the transfer window. But then also just the fact that he takes up a DP spot. It has limited. They need to spend in midfield, and they haven't really been able to. Part of that is because of Loba. Part of that is also because they decided to make Walker Zimmerman a designated player as well. So they have two of their designated players are consistent starters and among, if not the best in their positions around the league. I think that's fine. But then they used a third DP spot on a guy who has had zero impact. I think even more than the wasted transfer fee, which at this point it's a waste because they're not going to recoup close to 6.8 million of that. No one's lining up to pay that in January. But I think the most detrimental impact it has had is that they've just wasted a DP spot, and they really needed another high-end attacker to come in and help out this season, and they just didn't get that.
Can you see him still on this roster next year, or is this?
Oh boy, if he is on the roster, I think the only reason he is on the roster is because they couldn't find anybody to take him.
Yeah,
I think best case for them, and probably the only realistic thing, is that they send him out on loan in January and hope that he can get in form somewhere in South America. Maybe they can find a team in Liga MX who takes a flyer on him and thinks that he still has potential. He scores a couple goals and then kind of brings that transfer value back up a little bit. I think whatever happens, they sell him at a loss. Yeah. The other option is that they could use every team gets a buyout once per year. So they and his contract only runs through 2023. So they basically just have to eat a year's salary, which I think is just under 1.3 million. Yeah. So you can, if you're Nashville, I mean, that is, I guess, probably an option that I hadn't really considered, but you can essentially buy a DP spot for 1.3 million and open that up to see what happens. But yeah, I just don't see how they can afford to give him another year. I don't think he's come close to proving that he's worth it. And even if he does have the potential, I think there's still a good player somewhere in there, but they just don't have time to wait around for him to show it. They got to get a DP spot and get someone else in there who can actually produce.
Yeah. It seems like it's been a sort of quite a long running thing. It's just been having to wait for the club, and yeah, if you can get anything for him, great. But I think, like you say, maybe the buyout option might be, but it's all dependent on if they know who they want. There's no point now if they don't know who they want to replace, I guess.
I would imagine they have been looking at DP forward since the end of last year.
Yeah.
Because he came in July and was promised to be an instant impact and never was that. No, I mean, knowing how the technical staff works too. I mean, I'm assuming they've had a long list of players that they're looking at anyway, just to always keep their options open. But I think I would be surprised if they haven't kicked the tires on some players already.
Yeah, you'd hope so. When
you'd hope so. If they haven't, I think that's another concern. But from how they've operated in the past, I don't think that's something to worry about yet.
So looking at the sort of the other end of the roster, some of the more experienced players looking forward to next year. Obviously, you've got players like Teal Bunbury and Dax McCarty, CJ Sapong, Joe Willis as well. I think all coming up to the end of their contracts this year with an option for another. Do you see the majority of these first team players who have played regularly this season to be renewed and to still be a core of the team next year? Or do you see a lot more a busier maybe off season than you've had in recent years?
Yeah, that's kind of the biggest question going into this offseason. I mean, they're one of, if not the oldest teams in the league. The core of this team has essentially been the same for the entire 3 seasons in MLS. And it does kind of start to feel like, okay, maybe this season was the last season that they had a chance to win something without making big changes to this group. I mean, Sean Davis, they went and got him last year. He's going to be a long-term building block. They still rate Dax McCarty and Anibal Godoy highly, but McCarty will be 36 in April. So even if he plays, I think you saw it already this year. He couldn't play the same amount of minutes he had in the 2 previous years. I think he's still a valuable player to have around the team. I mean, just off the field, he's the leader in the locker room, and I think on the field he can still do a job, if maybe in more limited minutes. But I think if he wants to stay, he can stay. I think one thing to keep an eye on is the new Apple TV deal. He's done some broadcast work in the past. I imagine he's probably at least thought about, okay, do I have, like, would this be a good time to make that switch? But knowing him, I think he really wants to win a trophy in Nashville. So I imagine he'll be back for another year. Anibal Godoy has been a huge player for them. Again, they still rate him highly, but he missed 17 games this year injured, and he's over 30. I don't know. I think they probably renew the options on all of these guys, but I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe make some deals around the league to send a couple of them out. CJ Sapong and Teal Bunbury, again, both guys who have performed. Sapong a lot last year, and then Teal Bunbury, even though he was hurt, he was one of the more effective attackers. So if they keep both, and again, I think they could keep both, I think it's going to have to be at more limited minutes, knowing that, okay, you're going to stick around, but we're also going to spend big and bring in some other options in the winter, and you're going to have to fight for minutes off the bench.
Yeah, so that sort of reminds me of what reading, like, one of the comments of I think it's Walker Zimmerman mentioned. It's like, we've been in the league 3 years now. We're not a new team. Like, you've had this core that have helped you from the start with their experience, but now it's the time to push on. And from the conference change as well, going into the West, does it feel now that they are they feel like a top MLS side, which, I mean, their performances to a degree suggest they are now.
I think they are. I mean, they're going to go back into the East in 2023, which will be huge. St. Louis coming in will go out in the West, and it's going to eliminate a lot of that travel. And I think they're more comfortable in the East. I think the East, you have a couple of really good teams at the top, and I think overall, at least this year, it was a weaker conference. So I think it gives them opportunities to pick up more points that they struggle to pick up in the West. If you have Hani Mukhtar, I think you always have a shot to be elite. Again, Walker Zimmerman too. I mean, he had maybe a down year this year, and I think he was still a top 5 center back in the league. So they have some pretty good pieces. I think if they really go out and approach this transfer window, like, okay, we have to get some guys in here who can help us win now, I think they could be a top 2 team in the Eastern Conference next season. But I think we've been talking about it this whole time. I think there is a lot of weaknesses on this roster. And And I think it's going to be one of the busier off seasons they've had probably since the first year they came into MLS, when they essentially built a roster from scratch. I think we're going to see more comings and goings than we did since then.
And so, like you say, going back into these, maybe find some of these sides that are a little bit more attacking. I guess you've got a lot of teams that like to create a little bit more sort of sides like Orlando, who like things to be a little bit crazier on the pitch. It sort of opens up the game a bit more, which will help Mukhtar, especially in teams like this. Does it seem like going back into the East, it's getting set more to be able to like, right, this is where we are. We've got our forward planning now. There's no more changes really.
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully they won't keep flip-flopping back and forth. I imagine if MLS, I think it's going to be like Las Vegas or Sacramento. So it would make sense that the last team they add would be out in the West. So I think they should be in the Eastern Conference here, hopefully long term. I think they're more comfortable in the East. I think they're more familiar with teams in the Eastern Conference. This year was a lot of playing teams for the first time and trying to figure out how they approach games. I think too, not having the first 8 games on the road will be a huge help, because again, I think that really impacted how they built this roster. They won't have to worry about that. So I think hopefully they can be a little bit more front foot from the start. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe having their own stadium now too eases some of the financial issues. I mean, not that there are financial issues, but hopefully it opens things up a little bit more. They're not having to rent Nissan Stadium every game. They're taking home all the revenue from game days. They're not having to split it with the Titans owners. So it could open up things a little bit more to be more proactive in the transfer market. But I think at this point, they're just a more established team. Mukhtar has established himself again as probably the best, if not one of the best attackers in the league. And I think if they really build around him and even just give him another 1 or 2 options to work with in attack, I think they could. I think they have problems, but they're not that far away from being a really good team either.
No, definitely not. I think, yeah, like there's some of those you mentioned, they're quite an aging side, but there are some players along, like, so you've got like Walker Zimmerman, like you say, Mukhtar, but there's some players alongside them that are still in their sort of mid-20s who will be sort of the key players going forward. And there's other players to improve. It's not a huge turnover that needs to happen to the first 11, maybe more the squad. And are there players that's not, well, on the fact that it's been just Mukhtar, there's other players obviously involved. Are there any ones that you think maybe need a little bit of a mention that people outside of Nashville probably haven't paid enough attention to, that actually have taken a bit of a step and could be really useful players going into 2023?
And here go Nashville. It's Shaq Moore. Shaq Moore has got Mukhtar begging for it. He plays it in. He scores!
Yeah, I mean, I think Shaq Moore, I mean, we briefly mentioned him, but he's been exceptional since he got to Nashville. I think he's been one of the 2 or 3 best right backs in the league since he showed up. I mean, he's also on the fringes of the U.S. national team. Yeah. I think the October camp, Greg Berhalter mentioned him as one of the first players that he had trouble leaving off the roster. So I think he still hasn't, depending on what happens with other players and injuries and all that heading into Qatar, I think he has an outside shot to be on the World Cup roster. And he's obviously one that they went heavily after and targeted for a while. So he'll be here long term and is a huge piece to build around. Jacob Schaffelberg kind of completely changed their attack coming in on loan from Toronto. They have an option to buy, and in Bob Bradley's end of the year press conference, he said that it seems like Nashville are going to trigger that. So he should be here long term. And I think if he's probably a starter on the left side, and if not, he's the first name off the bench. Yeah. So I think he's going to be a big name to build around. And then Randall Ayala is another one. He was not nearly as productive this year as he was in his first 2 seasons. I'm interested to see how they use him going forward. I think they need to probably spend money and sign a more attacking winger, but I think he could be an interesting option if they shift him to a more central role. He did that a couple of times, especially late in games, and is definitely more of a box-to-box aggressive 8 than they currently have on the roster. So I think he could be an interesting one going forward. And then in defense, you also have Jack Mayer, who is kind of, I think he would start for 75% of other MLS teams, and he is just stuck behind Walker Zimmerman and Dave Romney. So he's another one who could be here long term. And yeah, like you said, there are plenty of players to build around. And I think with 2 or 3 signings who can really push into the starting 11 and maybe a little bit more attacking depth, I think this is a very good team.
So do you think if the additions are made, are you hoping, as the supportive group, hoping for a Supporters Shield challenge next year and back in the playoffs, go for MLS Cup? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I picked them to challenge for Supporters Shield this year. So I think the expectations are there. Like a lot of the pieces are there. They've been in that conversation. They were in that conversation in 2021. They tied Philadelphia on points for second place in the conference. So I mean, they're still a good team. And I think if they make these couple additions, they could be a really good team. Being at home for a more balanced schedule and all that too will help. But yeah, I think they've done a really good job building this roster over the first 3 years. And I think you're just now starting to see them get to the point where they need to do a little bit more and kind of turn some things over from that initial build. But I think they've earned the benefit of the doubt. And I think everything they've done so far has shown that they're aware of the problems and they'll address them. So I'm pretty optimistic heading into the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned they've done well with most of their recruitment. There have been some misses, but I mean, you started your expansion year was the same year as Inter Miami's, and the turnover they've had each year has just been incredible. I mean, they've made playoffs. Right. Yeah, but at least from a Nashville point of view, there's a bit more of a stability there going forward. And this seems to be a bit more of a set plan, and we'll have to see what happens with Inter Miami going forward. But it's they've definitely been that sort of core going forward, and there doesn't seem to be much panicking from the board, like at the board level. It seems to be.
No, I totally agree with that.
And I guess next year it'll be nice to not going to games where there's the old cliche, the first goal is the most important.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and kind of going back to what Walker Zimmerman said too, I think it's how they approach. They're obviously, I think, a consistent playoff team. But I think they want to change how they approach regular season games. I mean, they had a lot of dropped points in the regular season, a couple on the road, but especially at home, where they had leads late in games and kind of let their foot off the gas, or lost to teams like Houston, who were, I mean, second to last game. If they had taken even a point from that, they would have played the Galaxy at home, and it's a different story. Or they drew 0-0 with San Jose Earthquakes at home. So I think Zimmerman mentioned that. I mean, maybe new signings, but his main point was that they just need to be better in the regular season, and that the next step they want to take is to really challenge for those top spots for home playoff games, for Supporter Shields. And I think that seems like it's not just players getting frustrated and saying that. I think that's really kind of the direction this team wants to head, and I expect them to kind of make the signings that they need to really give them the opportunity to do that next year.
Yeah, it'll be really exciting to see how they approach it now, having this full season at home. There's not the wait at the beginning to then just go out and have the whole season ahead. Will be really exciting to see, and definitely keen to know what will happen over this off season. The players that will be coming in. Can you remind everyone where they can follow you and the different places where you're writing for, so that we can all keep up with what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest place to do it is just on Twitter. Just find me at Ben Wright. Then I'll be covering everything Nashville at BroadwaySportsMedia.com, and then through the playoffs and maybe a little bit over the offseason too, I'll have some more league-wide coverage at MLSsoccer.com. So yeah, but Twitter is where you can find it all in one place.
Yeah, brilliant. Yep. Thanks very much, Ben. I really appreciate time coming on, and hopefully, a nice, exciting new season for Nashville next year.
Yeah, thanks. This was a ton of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ben.
All right, take care.
So there we go. 2022 comes to a close for Nashville. Like Ben says, an aging side in some areas with their key players. So we should be expecting some changes over the off season, of players bringing in and looking to freshen up this squad as they look to move back to the east and look to support Hani Mukhtar and provide more goals from different areas to take some of the reliance off him. It was unsustainable to really expect him to carry them all the way, it seems, and it seemed to have shown. LA Galaxy did fantastically well to contain him in this game. So they will look ahead. Please follow me at Mike Rice 1983 on Twitter. Like and subscribe this channel, and hopefully we'll bring you some more Nashville chat going into next season to see what they've done, preparing for 2023 and to get back to challenging for an MLS Cup. Brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. Take care. Bye.